I remember the silence before the storm. I was born in a little apartment in Sokovia. The walls were thin, the roof leaked, and the power flickered more than it stayed. But it was home. Before I go on, take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. These stories are meant to be heard quietly, slowly. And there's more waiting to be told. Now, back to mine. Mama used to sing while she cooked. Songs I didn't know the names of. Sokovian lullabies. Soft and lilting, floating through the steam of boiled potatoes and cabbage. My brother Pietro and I would chase each other through the narrow rooms laughing until we collapsed into a pile of giggles and elbows. We didn't have much, but we had each other, and we had stories. Our father loved old American sitcoms dubbed in our language, playing from a battered VCR. He traded food rations to keep working. That's how we learned to dream. Not in our own language. Not even in our own world, but in black and white fantasies, where problems were always funny, and love always fixed everything by the time the credits rolled. I thought the world was simple back then. I didn't know it could fall apart in a moment. I was 10 the night the shell hit. We were sitting down for dinner laughing, just laughing. And then the world exploded. Dust, screaming, heat. And when the sound cleared, our parents were gone. Just gone. The floor above had collapsed. The walls were bleeding, daylight and flame. I could smell iron. I could hear Pietro's heart pounding louder than the alarms. And in the rubble, just 3 feet away, a missile, its nose buried in broken tile ticking. We didn't know then what we were staring at, but the words on the side were clear. Stark Industries. I stared at that name for 2 days, waiting for it to detonate. We huddled beneath a broken table, afraid to breathe too loud. Pietro kept whispering, "Don't move, don't move." And I waited for death like it was a friend who had just forgotten how to knock. But it never came. We were rescued, eventually, pulled from the wreckage by hands that didn't feel real. But the bomb never went off. And something inside me changed. That name, Stark, burned itself into my mind. From that day forward, it became more than a company. It became a ghost. We became orphans in a world that had no use for children without homes. We were passed through camps, shelters, cold barracks filled with colder people. But we had each other. Pietro was always the faster one, not just with his feet, but with his mouth, his wit, his temper. I was quiet, watching, listening. I started hearing things, feeling things. At first, I thought it was just the trauma. The echoes of war never really leave your body. But sometimes, I could feel the thoughts of others before they spoke. I knew when someone was lying. I knew when someone was afraid. I didn't tell anyone, not even Pietro, not yet. Then came Hydra. They promised us power. They promised us purpose. We were young, angry, and full of holes that vengeance seemed eager to fill. We volunteered for the experiments. No one forced us. No one had to. They said they could give us the strength to change the world. We didn't ask what it would cost. They brought us underground. The Hydra facility wasn't cold, not in temperature, but in feeling. Everything was metal and gray. There were no windows, no sky. Time didn't pass the same way there. You didn't wake up and say, "Today is Monday." You woke up and wondered if today was the day they would let you walk out, or the day you wouldn't wake up at all. The experiments started immediately. At first they just watched us, measured things, asked questions we didn't understand, but it wasn't long before they introduced us to it. The scepter. The object they kept locked in a glowing case. They said it was alien. They said it could unlock things inside us. They never said what it was really doing. They asked for volunteers. Pietro stepped forward first. I held my breath as they closed the chamber. There was a flash, a vibration in the floor, a silence that stretched too long. Then he stumbled out, alive, shaken, but something had changed. He could move now, faster than sight. He said it felt like his body had been lit on fire, but that the flames had taught him how to move between seconds. Then it was my turn. They placed me in front of the scepter. I remember the way it hummed, not just in the air but in my bones, like it was already inside me, waiting. They opened the chamber, and I stepped forward. At first nothing happened. Then the blue glow shifted, pulsed, and split open. The Mind Stone emerged, and everything else disappeared. I didn't see the walls, or the scientists. I saw light, shapes, a silhouette in red, a crown of chaos, a shadow of myself. I hadn't yet become. She didn't speak, but I understood. She was me, and I was her. When I woke up, I was on the floor, alarms blaring, people screaming. The footage would later show that I had collapsed, that the stone had surged. But I remembered only calm. After that, everything was different. I could move things without touching them. At first just little things. A paperclip, a pen, but then I could crush objects with a flick of my fingers. I could see into memories, plant ideas, create illusions. They said I was a miracle. They didn't say I was a weapon. Pietro and I trained every day. They built tests for us, obstacle courses, target simulations. We passed them all, but what they didn't know was that every night, before we slept, Pietro and I whispered to each other, "We'll burn this place down when it's done," because we never forgot who we were. Not Hydra's toys, not us. We were two kids from Sokovia, who had seen their parents die in front of them, who had stared at a missile with Stark's name on it, and waited to disappear. We never forgot that, not even when the Avengers showed up. They came in force. Iron Man, Captain America, Thor, Hawkeye, Black Widow. They tore through Hydra like fire through dry leaves. And we watched. We could have run, could have disappeared. But Pietro said no. Let's see what they're really made of. We tested them. I slipped into Stark's mind first. Let him see his fears. The broken world. The team dead. The threat above Earth. He never recovered from that. Not really. Then I broke into the others. One by one I showed them who they really were. What they were afraid of. It worked. We split them apart before they even left Sokovia. But that wasn't the victory we thought it would be. Because something else came from that day. Something worse. Ultron. We didn't know what we had done. Not really. We thought we were tearing down one machine, only to let another rise in its place. Ultron, he didn't come from Hydra. He came from Stark. Born of code and fear and good intentions twisted too fast. I remember the first time I saw him, not the shell of metal, but the mind. We found him in a warehouse, his voice echoing through half-finished drones, like a ghost trying to build itself a body. He spoke in riddles at first, talked about evolution, about peace, but not the kind that grows from understanding, the kind that grows from silence, from extinction. He said humanity was the disease, that the Avengers were the infection, that we were the cure. And I believed him. For a moment, I believed him. because everything he said was what we had whispered to ourselves for years, that the world needed to be torn apart before it could heal, that it had to burn before it could bloom. He promised to end the Avengers. And I let him. I helped him. So did Pietro. We gave him space. Time. We let him grow. He built armies from scrap and wires. Created bodies with no souls, voices with no breath. And then, he showed me the truth. Or, what he thought was the truth. Because I went deeper into his mind, I wanted to see what he saw. Why he hated them, why he thought destruction was the answer. And that's when I saw it. The future. The one where the earth was cracked, and the sky was full of fire. The one where everyone was dead, where the Avengers lay still, and silent, and broken. And in the middle of it all, Ultron stood. Alone, victorious, and empty. There was no peace in his dream. Only and I felt it. Like ice in my chest. He didn't want to heal the world. He wanted to bury it. We ran. Pietro grabbed me before I could stop shaking. We left that night. Without looking back, the world might still hate us. We thought. But we couldn't let it die. Not like that, not because of us. We found the Avengers. I don't think they were expecting us, but they didn't turn us away. Not in that moment. Maybe they were too desperate, or maybe they could see it in my eyes. I had seen the end. And I was terrified of it. Together we planned. Ultron was building something in Sokovia. Our home. He had chosen it for irony. For poetry. He embedded engines into the ground, tore our city from the earth, lifted it skyward like a hammer waiting to fall. He said he was going to drop it. Turn it into an extinction-level event. A meteor of metal and screams. We fought him in the sky. All of us. The team came together like pieces of a puzzle that had spent too long apart. Thor lit the sky with lightning. Cap stood his ground with grit and grit alone. Natasha moved like shadow and fire. And me, I held the line. I felt the drones before I saw them. Felt their minds cold. Mechanical. Empty. I tore them apart with my fingers. Made the earth tremble. Unleashed what the Mind Stone had left inside me. I became something else in that fight. Not just a girl who could move things. Not just a scared child from Sokovia. Something darker. Something more. And still, it wasn't enough. Pietro saw it. Before I did. The boy, Clint's son, trapped in the crossfire. A Quinjet tearing through the air. Guns spinning. I heard Pietro's heartbeat change. He moved faster than sound, faster than fear. He grabbed the boy. Shielded Clint. And then, silence. I turned, and he was lying in the rubble. Still, broken, gone. I felt the scream before I heard it. It didn't come from my throat. It came from somewhere deeper. Somewhere raw. I fell to my knees, and the world followed. I destroyed every drone within 100 yards, crushed them into twisted metal and static. Ultron couldn't stop me. No one could. But Pietro. He was already gone. We stopped the drop. The city fell in pieces. But not the way Ultron planned. It wasn't a victory. Not really. It was a delay, a wound, one that never quite healed. When it was over, I stood on the carrier deck, staring into the sky that had nearly swallowed us, and I realized my brother was gone, my family was gone, and I was still here, alone, again. After Sokovia, everything was quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't calm you. The kind that sits in your bones and hums with things unsaid. With people no longer here. Pietro was gone, and there wasn't a day. There still isn't, when I didn't feel the space he left. It wasn't just that he'd saved lives. It wasn't just that he had given everything. It was that he was the last piece of home I had, the last echo of our childhood, our mother's songs, our father's laughter. And in 1 second, he was a name on a list. Gone, but the world doesn't stop when your heart does. And I still had power. I still had blood on my hands. So I stayed. I joined the Avengers. They gave me a room at the compound. Clean, bright, full of things I didn't know how to use. I remember touching the edge of the new sheets the first night and thinking, they don't even smell like anything, just clean, just empty. I trained every day. Steve worked with me, patient, strong, clear. He didn't treat me like a child, and he didn't treat me like a weapon. He saw something in me that I didn't. Maybe he saw someone who still wanted to be good. Natasha helped too, not with powers. I don't think she ever really trusted mine, but with control. She taught me how to walk into a room like I belonged, how to listen with more than just ears, how to breathe when I wanted to scream. They all tried, in their way. Even Tony. He never said it out loud, but I think he blamed himself. Not just for Pietro, but for me. For what the Mind Stone had done. For what Ultron had become. I didn't hate him. I couldn't. He was carrying more than any of us. And I could feel it. Every time he looked at me. There was guilt. And fear. But there was hope too. Maybe he thought if I could be okay, then maybe so could he. That first year was full of small things. Missions, training, debriefs, learning to sleep with the lights off again. And then there was him. Vision. He was different. Not just because of how he looked. Not even because he was born from a stone and a code. And 1,000 contradictions. He was calm. When he spoke, it felt like everything around him slowed down, like he wasn't rushing to finish a sentence, or prove a point, or protect his ego. He just was. And he listened. No one had ever listened like he did. One day, I found him reading a book in the compound's library. He didn't look up right away, but when he did, he smiled gently and said, "There are many things I don't understand, but I'd like to." I sat beside him, and we didn't speak for hours. That became our thing. Sitting, reading, not talking unless the words really wanted to come out. He wasn't afraid of my silence, and I wasn't afraid of his questions. With him, I didn't have to be the Scarlet Witch, or the girl from Sokovia, or the broken weapon Hydra tried to forge. I could just be Wanda. And that scared me, because when you let someone see you, really see you, you give them the power to leave. But Vision didn't leave. Not when I woke screaming in the night. Not when my powers lashed out involuntarily. Not when I told him about the missile and the rubble and waiting to die. He listened. Held my hand with fingers I wasn't sure could feel. And yet somehow he would ask questions like a child and a philosopher at the same time. Why do people grieve? Does pain mean the love was real? Would you undo the hurt if it meant forgetting the joy? And I didn't always have answers, but with him I started asking my own, like, could someone like me have a future? Not a weapon, not an asset, but a life. Could I have a morning where I made coffee and forgot what it meant to destroy? Could I be held without hurting the one who held me? With Vision, it felt possible. Even if I didn't fully believe it, he believed enough for both of us. I thought I was getting better. I thought if I followed the rules, listened to Steve, kept my power in check, the world would begin to forget what I had been. I even let myself believe it once or twice. Then came Lagos. It was supposed to be simple, a mission. We were tracking a group connected to Hydra. Rumors of a biological weapon. Cap was leading, Sam and I were with him. We moved like a unit. Clean, precise. At least at first. We found them in a marketplace. Civilians everywhere. Children watching from windows, women selling cloth under faded umbrellas. It all happened so fast. One of the men broke away. A bomb strapped to his chest. Steve chased him, cornered him, but there wasn't enough time. The man triggered it. And I reacted. I reached with my power, wrapped it around the blast like a fist made of red light. I pulled it upward, away from the people on the ground. I tried to contain it, to protect them, but I didn't realize there was a building above us, a hospital. And I threw the explosion into it. The glass shattered. The fire bloomed. And then there was only screaming. Afterward, there was silence. The kind that doesn't come from peace, but from grief. Steve stood beside me. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. I could feel it. The weight of it all. The anger. The shame. The failure. Back at the compound, they showed me the footage. The news played it over and over. Avenger causes mass casualties in Lagos. They didn't say my name, but they didn't need to. The red glow was unmistakable. I watched a mother cry on screen. Her child had been in that hospital. Her son. He was 10, like I had been. And suddenly I wasn't in the compound anymore. I was back in Sokovia, under the table, with a missile ticking in front of me. I couldn't breathe. Tony found me that night. He didn't yell, he didn't comfort me either. He just handed me a folder. Inside was a photo. A young man, dark skin, soft eyes. The caption read, Charles Spencer, 21, graduated with honors, volunteered in Lagos. He said his mother wants to know why her son had to die. And then he left. They started drafting the accords soon after. Paperwork, signatures, oversight. Tony was for it. He said we needed boundaries, that if we didn't agree to be put in check, the world would find a way to do it for us. Steve disagreed, said we had to retain the freedom to act when necessary, that politics should never decide when people needed saving. I didn't know what to think. All I knew was that I was tired of hurting people, tired of being a name behind an apology. I stayed quiet until the government showed up at the compound. They didn't say they were there for me, but they never had to. They placed me on house arrest. Vision was assigned to stay with me. He didn't say it, but I knew. It wasn't his idea. Still, he didn't treat me like a prisoner. He played chess with me in the mornings, tried to cook, read aloud from his books in the evenings, and every day, I watched the news, watched my face become a symbol for everything the world feared about power. I tried to tell myself I deserved it. Maybe I did, but Vision, he never flinched. Not when my hands sparked with energy, not when I cried in the middle of the night and shattered every mirror in the bathroom, not when I sat for hours on the floor, just trying to remember who I was before the fire. He stayed until the walls came down again. Steve came for me when the team fractured, when sides were drawn. He came. He didn't ask. He just offered his hand, and I took it, not because I was sure, but because I couldn't sit behind another locked door and pretend it was protection. We fought in an airport. It sounds ridiculous now, but it was real. Friends against friends. Sam, Rhodey, Natasha, even Peter, the boy with the wide eyes and nervous hands. I could have crushed them, but I didn't. I held back. So did they. We were trying not to break each other even as the world broke around us. Rhodey felt Tony's face when it happened. It was like he lost more than a teammate. He lost something he believed in. I don't blame him. I lost something too. I lost the illusion that we were still whole, still one team. When it ended, Steve and I went into hiding. Wakanda sheltered us. Their kindness was unexpected. T'Challa gave us space. Time. I spent those months trying to become invisible. And failing. Because you can't hide from the parts of yourself that glow in the dark. Wakanda was quiet. Not just in sound, but in energy. Everything there hummed with life and stillness. It was the first place I had been in years that didn't look at me with suspicion, didn't whisper about my past behind carefully closed doors. They didn't ask why I was there, they just gave me a room, and a window that looked out over green hills and water that moved like glass. I slept for the first time in weeks, and when I woke up, Vision was there. He had followed me, not as a guard this time, not as an assignment, but as something else. Something real. We spent our days walking the edges of the compound. He would ask questions. Always more questions. What did the colors in the sunset mean to me? Did I think dreams were messages or just echoes? Did I believe we could ever be more than what we were made to be? And I would try to answer, not always in words. Sometimes with a look. Sometimes with silence. He understood those too. We cooked together, though he didn't need to eat. He said it was about the process, about learning the rituals of life. I burned the rice once, and he laughed. A soft, surprised sound that echoed down the hallway. That night, I kissed him. It wasn't dramatic. There was no thunderclap, no swelling music. Just the two of us, standing in a kitchen full of steam and warmth. And when our lips touched, it felt like breathing, like something I hadn't known I was missing until I found it. After that, everything changed, not in big, sudden ways, but in the small, precious shifts. I started to smile more, to speak in full sentences again, to let myself exist in a room without apology. We made a home within the cracks of a world that didn't want us to be together. We knew it couldn't last, that the world would come for us eventually. But we pretended, just for a while. He started to power down more often. Little glitches in his speech, a flicker in his eye, the stone in his forehead pulsed slower. We both knew it was the Mind Stone, that he was more than it, but not separate from it. And others were beginning to notice. Bruce, Steve, Natasha. They called us back, said we needed to talk about Thanos. At first I didn't understand, then they explained it. The Infinity Stones, 6 of them. Thanos wanted them, needed them, and Vision carried one. If he got it, half the universe would die. Just like that, like flipping a coin, like turning off a light. Vision offered to remove it himself, to sacrifice his life. I refused. I said we'd find another way. Bruce and Shuri began working, trying to separate his consciousness from the stone, but time wasn't on our side. Thanos was coming. When the battle reached Wakanda, I stood on the field beside the others. I felt the earth tremble beneath our feet, felt the storm in the air, and I held Vision's hand like it was the only thing keeping me tethered to the moment. We fought, me, Steve, Natasha, Okoye, T'Challa, all of us. Waves of creatures tore across the plain unending. I stood with them as long as I could, but in the end, it came down to me. Thanos was close. Vision looked at me, and he said the words I will never forget. It's not fair, it shouldn't be you. But it is. You have to do it. And I did. I put my hand to the stone. I pushed. My power met his core, and I could feel him, every memory, every hope, every heartbeat. He told me he loved me, and then I shattered him. I destroyed the stone, and with it, the man I loved. I fell to my knees, empty, and then Thanos turned back time. I watched Vision's body reassemble, watched his eyes flicker, watched him scream, and then Thanos tore the stone from his head with his bare hand. No magic, no mercy, just power. And Vision died again, this time without me, and then I vanished. And then I was gone. Not in pain, not in panic, just gone, like stepping into sleep without dreaming. One moment my knees hit the dirt in Wakanda, the next, nothing. No light, no voice, no time. If there was a space between life and death, I floated there, not awake, not truly dead, just paused. And then suddenly, I wasn't. I woke gasping, like I'd been holding my breath for 5 years. Only seconds had passed for me, but for the world, half a decade had slipped by. I stood in a field of broken roots and fire, and when I looked around, the world had changed. People were older. The sky felt heavier. Grief had woven itself into the very air. But he wasn't there. Vision. He didn't come back, because he hadn't been snapped away. He had been killed. Before it. Twice. And nothing could undo that. They told me what happened. How Tony had done it, how he'd snapped Thanos and his army out of existence. How he had saved us all, and lost himself in the process. I stood at the lake as they laid him to rest. I didn't cry. Not because I wasn't hurting, but because grief, it had hollowed me already. Tears felt too light for the weight inside me. Peter stood nearby. Rhodey, Pepper, everyone carried something in their eyes that words could never reach. I thought of Vision then. How he would have stood just a little apart from the other. How he would have asked if mourning meant we loved hard enough. I wanted to answer him, but the silence didn't break. After the funeral, I disappeared. No press, no farewells, no compound or team or duty. I had nothing left to protect, only memories that wouldn't stop echoing. So I walked through cities where no one recognized me, through forests that didn't care who I had been, through the spaces between who I was and who I was afraid I might become. People whispered about me. Some called me a hero. Some, a murderer, a ticking time bomb, a goddess of grief. I didn't correct them, because some days I wasn't sure they were wrong. I found a little town tucked between nowhere and never. Westview. It wasn't special. Not to the world. Just a dot on a map with a post office and an empty lot. But it meant something to him. Vision. We had talked about it once. A home. A future. A place where we could grow old. He had bought a plot of land there. Left it to me. The deed was still in my name. There was a note, scrawled in his clean, careful handwriting. For us to grow old in. I sank to my knees in that empty lot. The ground was dry. The foundation never poured. There was no house, no life, just dirt and memory and silence. And something inside me broke. Not loudly, not like thunder, but like glass beneath soft footsteps. It cracked, then and my power spilled out. It wasn't a choice. It wasn't even a thought. It was instinct. Raw, unfiltered, born from every moment I had ever loved and lost. I felt the energy bloom from my chest. Red, wild, endless. And the world bent to it. The air shimmered. The ground shifted. And a house rose. Our house. Walls where there had been none. Furniture that didn't exist. Rooms filled with sunlight and laughter I hadn't heard in years. And him, Vision, he stepped forward out of the glow. Alive. Whole. Smiling. He didn't remember the pain. He didn't remember Thanos. He just said, "Wanda," and everything inside me stilled. I had created something I didn't understand. A world shaped by grief. A reality spun from memory and magic and pain. And I didn't stop it. Because I couldn't. Because I didn't want to. Because for the first time since Sokovia, I felt safe. Whole. Loved. I told myself I was healing. But really, I was hiding. It felt like waking up inside a memory I never lived. But somehow, still mine. Vision stood beside me in the kitchen. He wore a tie, crooked, held a briefcase he didn't need. And he smiled like we had done this for years. "Have a good day at work, darling." The words floated into the air, like lines from a script. My hand rose, waved, as if by muscle memory. And when the door closed behind him, I turned, and everything shimmered. The walls, the light, the feel of the space. It was perfect, too perfect. But I didn't care. I told myself this was healing. This was happiness. This was what I deserved. Each day had a rhythm. Breakfast. Greetings from neighbors. Vision coming home from his job at computational services. The nights ended with laughter, soft kisses and fading into black and white. And when morning returned, so did we. Only this time, the world had changed. From the 50s to the 60s. Then to the 70s. Time bent like film reels, switching without warning. My clothes changed. My hair shifted. The town adjusted like it had always been that way. And Vision never questioned it. Not at first. He lived with me inside the lie. And maybe, some part of him, however real he was, believed it. Or maybe, he just wanted me to be happy. Even if he didn't know why. And then I was pregnant. Just like that. One moment I was smiling at dinner. The next, a bump. A baby on the way. And I felt joy. Real, terrifying, consuming joy. 2 sons. Tommy and Billy. They arrived fast, too fast. But in that house, in that world, it felt right. They cried in my arms. Laughed in the sunlight. They grew, rapidly, impossibly. Babies one moment. Boys the next. But I didn't question it. Because I couldn't. Because questioning would mean tearing at the seams. And if I pulled on the wrong thread, everything would unravel. The town smiled back at me. Neighbors waved. Children played. No one asked questions. But behind their eyes, I could feel it. The tension. The pause. Like actors, waiting for direction. People locked inside roles they hadn't auditioned for. They said what they were supposed to say. Laughed at the right moments. Cried when it was convenient. And I let them. Because I told myself they were safe. That they were happy. That I had built something better for them than the world ever had. but the truth buzzed at the edges of my mind. They weren't free. They weren't living. They were trapped by me. Then Monica came. I didn't know her at first. She called herself Geraldine. Moved into town like anyone else. Smiled. Brought fruit. Held my babies. But she wasn't like the others. She remembered too much. Said things that didn't belong in this reality. Spoke of Ultron, of Pietro's. And I felt my heart seize. I remembered the sound of bullets, the weight of my brother's body in my arms. And I threw her out, not with hands, but with power. She flew through walls, fields, barriers, and the world outside noticed. They called it the a growing, glowing field of warped reality. And outside its edges, Sokovia waited. Monitors, fences, camps, people trying to reach me, to fix something they thought was broken. But I didn't want their help. I didn't want their logic, because inside the hex, I had everything I had ever lost. And I couldn't let go. Vision began to question. He saw the skips, the rewinds, the edits. He confronted me, asked why people cried behind smiles, why his coworker stared like he was drowning behind his own eyes. I told him I didn't know. But deep down, I did. And when he tried to leave, to pass through the barrier, he began to fall apart, piece by piece, like his very being was tethered to the dream. And I expanded the hex. I reached out with my power and pulled the world wider. I swallowed more land, more people, just to keep him together, just to keep us together. But I knew I was losing control. And then she came. Agnes. Or, not Agnes. Agatha Harkness. She'd been there all along, smiling, laughing, playing her part. But behind her eyes, she had always known. She wasn't a prisoner. She was a predator. She revealed herself slowly, then all at once. Took my children, unveiled the truth. Told me what I was. Not a witch. Not a victim. A myth. The Scarlet Witch. Agatha said the words like they'd always belonged to me. Scarlet Witch. It didn't sound like a title. It sounded like a prophecy. A shadow, a crown. I had never asked for, but one that had been growing with me all along. She said I was born, not made, that the Mind Stone didn't give me power. It only awakened what was already there. That chaos magic ran through my blood like fire disguised as silk. She said I was dangerous, that I didn't understand the spells I was casting, that I had built the hex without even knowing the runes I was weaving. She called me a being of legend, one fabled to destroy the world. I told her she was wrong, but part of me wondered, because the truth was, I had done this. I had built a world where people lived in stories they didn't write, where vision breathed without ever truly being alive, where my children laughed and played, only within the lines of a spell I couldn't see. And yet, I wasn't ready to let go. Not yet. Agatha showed me memories. Not hers, mine. She walked me back through my own life, like chapters in a book I had tried to close too early. We stood in the ruins of my childhood. I saw my parents again. My father smiling, stacking DVDs of old American sitcoms. My mother laughing at the same jokes we'd all heard 100 times. I watched them explode. Felt the floor vanish. Felt the dust fill my lungs. And I saw myself small, shaking, reaching toward the unexploded Stark bomb with both hands. And stopping it. Not by chance. Not by fate. By magic. raw, untamed, buried inside a child who hadn't yet learned the word for it. Agatha nodded beside me. You used a probability hex, she said softly. You saved your life, with chaos. I didn't speak, because I didn't know how to explain what it felt like to learn that I had always been this, not cursed, not changed, but born strange. She took me further, to the Hydra facility. I saw myself again, older now, walking toward the scepter. I watched as the Mind Stone revealed itself, and for a moment, the veil lifted. I saw her, the Scarlet Witch, cloaked in red, crowned in light, floating like a goddess over fire. Me, a version of me, or the future, or a memory I hadn't made yet. Then it vanished, and I fell, unconscious, but something had changed in that moment. The stone hadn't just awakened my magic. It had called to it, amplified it, whispered to it, and it had whispered back. We visited the Avengers compound, the hallway I used to walk at night, where I had paced after Lygos, where I had avoided mirrors and pity, and there was Vision, sitting on the couch, watching sitcoms. He turned when I entered the room. I remember the weight of grief in my chest that day, the aching silence after Pietro, the way everything felt too loud and too empty at the same time. I sat beside him. He didn't say I'm sorry. He didn't say it'll get better. He just listened. Then, after a long pause, he asked, "What is grief, if not love persevering?" And something inside me softened, like a thread had been stitched into place, like I was seen. Agatha brought me back to Westview, to the empty lot. She told me the truth I hadn't wanted to hear, that I had created the hex from nothing but memory and sorrow. That Vision wasn't just resurrected, he was rewritten, built from my power and longing. That my children were spells given shape, not born, made. She offered me a choice, give her my power, or lose everything I had conjured. And I couldn't answer, because how do you let go of something that feels more real than pain? How do you choose reality when illusion has been your only shelter from grief? We fought. Not with fists, with magic, with wounds opened wide and made visible. Agatha cast her spells with centuries of knowledge behind them, but I fought with instinct, with chaos, with everything I had never learned to control but had always carried. She tried to drain me, to make me weaker with every blast, and I let her. I let her think I didn't understand, because even in pain I learn. Even in sorrow I remember. I carved runes into the air, into the walls of the hex itself, a boundary, a rule. No witch can cast within a space defined by another. Agatha fired again, but her magic fizzled. Mine did not. I turned the tide, let my power flood back into my veins, and then I claimed my name. I became the Scarlet Witch, not a villain, not a savior, something older, something more. And as the crown formed above my brow, woven from light and grief and destiny, I knew what I had to do. I kissed Vision goodnight, tucked in my boys, told them I loved them more than words could carry, and I walked outside. As the hex began to collapse, the sky fell inward, the walls shrank, the house dissolved, and I stood alone in the center of the storm, until it was gone, until they were gone. When the world I created vanished into dust, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't fall to my knees. I just stood there, surrounded by the people whose lives I had rewritten, whose minds I had borrowed, whose grief I had ignored to silence my own. They stared at me, not with hatred, not with forgiveness, with silence. The kind that tells you you're no longer a person in their eyes. You're something else now. A force. A storm. A warning. I walked away. Past Monica. She didn't stop me. Didn't reach for her weapon. She just looked at me. Her voice calm. They'll never know what you sacrificed. And I nodded. Because how could they? How do you explain giving up your children, your home, your only tether to happiness? Because the truth demanded it. No one would ever understand. Not really, but I didn't need them to. Not anymore. I left Westview behind. And found the mountain. It was hidden, high and ancient, cradled in clouds and quiet, the kind of place the world forgets on purpose. There was no road, no map, no name, just stone, snow, and something calling to me. I built a cabin, nothing grand, just wood and glass and walls that didn't judge me. And there I lived, two versions of me, one who made tea, walked the forest trails, sat in silence as the wind moved through the trees, and the other, she studied. She opened the Darkhold, the Book of the Damned, left behind by Agatha, bound in skin, written in shadows. It whispered, always, even when closed. Its pages didn't turn like paper. They unfolded, like memories, like wounds, and each one revealed a piece of what I was, what I had been, what I might become. It told me I wasn't the first. There had been others, women who wielded chaos, who broke the world to reshape it, who were worshipped, feared, destroyed. The Darkhold knew them all, and now, it knew me. I studied for hours that felt like days. Time bent strangely in the cabin. I didn't eat much. Didn't sleep. Not really, because the other me didn't need to. She hovered above the floor, always reading, eyes glowing red under her crown, and in the silence of night, I heard them. Tommy, Billy, their voices, not echoes, not dreams, cries from somewhere I couldn't reach, from a universe I hadn't yet touched. Mom, help us. And that's when I knew. They weren't gone. Not entirely, not everywhere. The multiverse wasn't theory. It was real, endless worlds, endless versions, and in one of them, my boys were alive. I flipped through the pages faster, desperate. The Darkhold didn't offer instructions, it offered possibilities, prices, paths, and always a cost. Because magic, real magic, doesn't give, it takes. Agatha had warned me, but grief doesn't weigh cost, it only knows absence. So I searched, through binding spells, reality tears, soul projections. I learned more in a month than most witches did in lifetimes, and still, it wasn't enough. Because to find my sons, I needed more than knowledge. I needed power, ancient power, forbidden. I needed the multiverse itself. They would come for me. Eventually, the ones who protected order, who believed magic should be boxed and labeled, and hidden behind stone walls and oaths. They would call me unstable, corrupted, a threat, and maybe they were right, but I didn't care. Because I had heard their voices, felt their fear, and no mother, no being, could ignore that call. I would find them, I would bring them home, even if I had to tear the universe apart to do. The first time I dreamwalked, I didn't know if I'd come back. The Darkhold warned me. Not with words but with heat behind the eyes, with air that hummed against my skin when I traced the spell with my fingers. Dreamwalking, the art of reaching across realities, of slipping into the body of another version of yourself in another world. A forbidden practice, a spell of absolute invasion. But I had already broken so many rules I couldn't hear them anymore. And I had already lost too much to stop now. It began at twilight, when the wind was still, I sat cross-legged on the cabin floor, the dark hold open before me. The symbols glowed red, brighter than they ever had. I whispered my name, not the one the world had given me, not Wanda, but the true name, the one wrapped in magic and myth and pain, the Scarlet Witch. And the walls around me faded, not melted, not cracked. They just ceased. I blinked, and I was no longer in the cabin. I was in a home, warm, lived in, walls painted a soft green, photos of children on the mantel, and then I saw them. Tommy, Billy, they ran through the living room, laughing, shouting something about ice cream and bedtime. And there I was, standing in the kitchen, but not me, a version of me, a Wanda, who had never made the hex, who had never lost vision, who had found happiness without breaking the world to make it. She turned, smiling, and her smile, it was peaceful, whole. I watched her, myself, kiss the boys goodnight, tuck them in with practiced hands, whispering lullabies I hadn't sung in years. I wanted to speak, to reach out, to step into her skin and never leave. But I couldn't, because I was only a guest, a shadow riding a soul that wasn't mine. I returned to my body with a gasp. The cabin felt colder than before. The stars outside had shifted. Time had passed. I had touched another life, and now I wanted it every night. After that, I dreamwalked. I searched the multiverse like a mother, searching every street, every alley, every echo. Some worlds were broken, some burned, some had no children, no vision, no peace. But others had me, smiling and real and whole, living a life I was never allowed to have. I watched the boys grow older, saw them lose teeth, win spelling bees, cry over scraped knees. I learned the scent of their pillows, the sound of their laughter as they ran barefoot through grass, and with each glimpse, the ache inside me grew. It filled every space that peace had once lived, until there was only purpose and obsession. The Darkhold whispered names to me, worlds where the boundary between dreams and flesh could be broken, where the children could become mine, not just in passing, not just in visions, but forever. But I needed more than a spell. I needed a key, a guide, and that's when I learned about her. America Chavez. A girl with power beyond comprehension. She could move between realities, not dreamwalk like I did, but physically travel. No spell, no anchor, no consequence. She didn't know how it worked, didn't understand the gift she carried. But I did. With her I wouldn't have to borrow versions of my children. I could go to them, hold them, stay. No more illusions, no more watching from shadows. A real life, a real world. All I had to do was take her power. I told myself it would be painless, that I'd make it quick, that a sacrifice of one could bring peace to many, that I wasn't doing this as a villain, but as a mother. But deep down I knew better. I had crossed too many lines to claim innocence, but I couldn't stop, because every dream left me more hollow, because every morning I woke up to silence, no footsteps on stairs, no half-eaten cereal bowls, no arms flung around my waist with sleepy giggles, just wind, and pages turning in the dark. I went to Camartage as a storm, but I didn't start as one. I arrived as a mother, calm, focused, with hope folded neatly beneath my skin, like a letter I hadn't opened yet. I asked for the girl, America Chavez, the one who could travel between worlds. I asked politely. Wong stood at the gate. He didn't flinch, even when he felt the magic beneath my voice. He simply said, "She's under our protection." And with that, the choice was made. Not by me, but by them. I gave them a chance. A warning. A plea. Let me have her. I won't hurt anyone. I just want to be with my sons. But they closed the gates. Summoned their sorcerers. Drew their circles in the air. And stood in a wall of light and conviction. So I answered, not as Wanda. Not as the woman who had once wept at Vision's grave. I answered, as the Scarlet Witch. The sky split above Camartage. Clouds churned, dark and crimson, like blood boiling in the heavens. The wind bent the trees to the ground, and the walls trembled with the weight of ancient magic reawakened. They tried to stop me. Shields, bindings, blades of energy and walls of force. But I had become more than a spellcaster. More than grief, I was chaos embodied. And chaos does not bow. I tore through the outer defenses. With every flick of my hand, I unraveled their formation, tossed their strongest into the sky like paper caught in a storm. They fought bravely. I respected that. Even admired it. But they didn't understand what I was willing to do for my children, how far I had already gone. How far I still could go. I found her hiding behind them. America, a teenager. Terrified, eyes wide and filled with something that twisted in my chest. She looked at me like I was a monster. And for a moment, it almost broke me. But I told myself it was necessary, that she would understand, that one day, she would have a family, and maybe then, she'd forgive me. Wong tried to intervene. So I held him with magic too. Ancient for the room. He called me witch. But it wasn't said like a name. It was said like a curse. And maybe by then, she opened a portal mid-attack. Out of fear. Out of instinct. And before I could pull her back, she vanished. Pulled strange with her, through worlds. Colors. Dimensions. Gone. I stood in the ruins of Camartage. The air was thick with dust and energy still crackling from broken spells. The surviving sorcerers watched me from a distance, too afraid to move. And Wong, chained in midair, looked at me not with fear, but with sorrow. Like he could still see the girl I used to be. Buried somewhere beneath all the power and pain. I turned away. Not out of shame. Not anymore. But because my time there was done. I hadn't found the girl. But I would. Because there are no closed doors for the Scarlet Witch. Not in this world. Not in any. Back in my chamber. The Darkhold pulsed. Its pages fluttered with unseen wind. It told me where they had gone. Multiversal nexus. A temple hidden outside time. A place once known only by whispers. Mount Wundagore. The birthplace of chaos. My true origin. And the seat of the power I had only begun to understand. There, I would find what I needed. Not just to travel, but to rewrite fate itself. To tear down the veil between worlds. To bring my boys home. Not versions. Not dreams. Mount Wundagore wasn't just a mountain, it was a wound in the world. A place where the sky cracked differently, where light bent like it was remembering another shape, where magic didn't hum, it howled. The wind there didn't blow, it spoke, in voices older than language. I climbed alone, no map, no path, just the Darkhold in my hands, and something ancient pulling me upward. Like a memory I hadn't made yet. Every step was harder than the last. Not because of the terrain, but because the mountain remembered me. At the summit, the temple stood like bones rising from the rock, massive, cracked, waiting. It wasn't ruined, it was sleeping. And as I approached, the runes on the stone came alive. They glowed red, like embers behind thick glass. And then, they recognized me. Doors that hadn't moved in centuries opened with a breath. And inside, I saw myself etched in the stone, crowned, floating, hands alight with chaos. The Scarlet Witch, not a myth, a prophecy. Written here, long before I was born. The temple welcomed me, not with warmth, but with purpose. Creatures waited in the shadows, not demons, guardians, twisted, bound, half flesh, half spell. They knelt at my feet, silent, as if they had been waiting for me, as if they knew I would come. I placed the Darkhold on the altar, and the mountain answered. It bloomed, revealed corridors I hadn't seen, wells of memory, pools of spellcraft carved into the very floor. I walked through the halls and each wall whispered my name, not the name the world knew, the other one, the name only magic remembered. I began to study again, not like before, not like the cabin. This was different, deeper. Here magic didn't need permission. Here I didn't question what I was becoming. I dreamwalked every night. Searched for the world where Tommy and Billy were mine. One in particular kept pulling me back. The one where the boys had grown a little older, where their mother, my other self, tucked them in after long days. They loved her, laughed with her, ran to her arms when storms rolled in. I watched from behind her eyes, pretending I was home, pretending the weight in my chest was peace, and not pressure, but pretending it stopped being enough. I knew what I had to do, to open a gate, not just with spellcraft, but with blood, with binding, the kind of magic that tears as it mends. I would take America Chavez's power, not destroy her. I told myself that, but the spell required more than words. It required my whole self. I built the circle in Wundagor's heart, wrote runes in the air with fingers that trembled, but not from fear, from anticipation. Wong was there. They had captured him again, brought him to me like a final test. He tried to stop me, told me the Darkhold corrupted all it touched, that I was losing myself, but I looked at him, and I said, if you knew what I'd lost, you'd do it too. And I meant it, because grief changes you, because when you hold absence in your arms long enough, it becomes a shape you can't put down. So I cast the spell, opened the multiverse, felt it groan beneath me. The air shimmered, the floor cracked, the temple came alive. And then, I found her. America, running, afraid, but close, so close. I reached across worlds, and the spell worked. The veil between worlds thinned, split, bent like glass about to crack. And through it, I saw her. America. She ran through collapsing realms, chased by creatures that had no name, born from the shadows of the Darkhold's design. Doctor Strange was with her, still protecting her, still pretending this was about balance or justice, or morality. He didn't understand. He had never lost what I lost. Not the same way. He didn't wake from dreams in tears. Didn't live with the echo of voices he couldn't answer. Didn't carry the shape of absence in every part of his soul. I reached through the multiverse, touched the world I had chosen, the one where Tommy and Billy were mine. Real, and for a moment, I wasn't the Scarlet Witch. I was Mom. bare feet on carpet, peanut butter on fingertips, laughter bubbling in from another room. They looked at me like I belonged, because to them, I did. But then she arrived, the other me, and I felt it. The tear in the fabric, the fracture of self. Two Wandas, one reality, one family, only one could stay. She saw me, and she didn't scream, didn't fight. She looked into my eyes, my own eyes, and said softly, "Please, don't do this." And something inside me flinched, because I thought I would hate her, thought I would envy her, resent her for having what I never did, but instead, I saw her pain. It wasn't smaller than mine. It was different, because she lived with the fear of losing what I had already lost. And suddenly, she didn't feel like my enemy. She felt like a mirror, one I wasn't ready to face. Back on Wanda, America resisted. She opened a portal behind me, showed me the world I had tried to enter. Not just the boys, but them, afraid of me. Tommy crying, Billy hiding behind their mother, myself, screaming, "Don't hurt us." And that sound, it shattered me. Not because it hurt, but because it was true, because I had become the very thing I thought I was fighting. A monster clawing at the glass, demanding love that could no longer be mine. I fell to my knees, not in defeat, in surrender, to the truth, to the weight, to the silence that had always followed me. And then, I let go. The temple began to collapse. The Darkhold's magic unraveled, thread by thread. The runes burned themselves from the walls, and the mountain cried out as it died. I looked to Wong. He didn't say anything, just watched as I stood, lifted my arms, and brought the stone down on top of me. Because if the Scarlet Witch had to exist, if she was destined to burn worlds to ash, then let her burn here. Let her end where she began, alone. I thought that would be it. The end. Wundagore buried beneath stone and memory. The Darkhold's pages turned to ash. The echoes of my children silenced by my choice. But when I closed my eyes, I didn't feel peace. I felt unfinished, like a book that ends mid-sentence, like a song that fades before the chorus. There's a quiet kind of grief that comes after you've survived yourself. After the storm has passed and you're still here, standing in the wreckage of who you used to be. I opened my eyes, and I wasn't dead. The mountain was gone. Wong had escaped, I think. He never told me how. I only know that when I woke, the sky was soft again. The wind didn't scream. The ground didn't pulse. Magic had gone quiet. Inside me, too. The Scarlet Witch was silent. Maybe not gone, but still, waiting. I left Wundagore behind, didn't fly, didn't vanish. I walked through forests, villages, empty roads where no one knew my name. Sometimes I would stop and rest beside rivers, listen to birds I couldn't name, sleep under trees that didn't care what I had done. I tried to live simply, a borrowed name, a rented room, hands that grew herbs instead of conjuring them. I brewed tea for strangers, mended torn sleeves, and I smiled when people spoke to me. Not because I felt joy, but because it felt like the thing to do. Like a human reaction I hadn't practiced in years. The dreams still came. Some nights I heard them again. Tommy calling my name through walls that weren't there. Billy laughing at something I hadn't said yet. Other times I saw them fully grown, happy, without me, and that was harder, because it meant they didn't need me, because it meant the universe had healed from my absence, better than it had ever healed from my presence. I didn't know what I was waiting for. Redemption, forgiveness, or maybe just enough silence to become invisible again. But I learned something in that stillness, something the Darkhold never taught me, something Agatha couldn't see, something I had buried beneath spells and sorrow. Grief doesn't go away. It becomes part of you. Like a second heart, it beats quietly. In moments you don't expect, you learn to breathe around it, to move with it, to live, not despite it, but alongside it. I returned to the cabin once. Not the one from Wundagore. The first one. The one from before the Darkhold. The one where tea still waited on the stove. Dust covered the books. The floorboards creaked louder than I remembered. I sat in the doorway and watched the sun set behind the hills. The sky turned the same color as the hex, but gentler, like magic without hunger. I didn't cast anything that night. I didn't read. I just watched. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a monster. I felt like a person. Small, scarred, but still here. Still trying. Still mine. There's something strange about beginnings. They rarely look like the first page of a story. No fireworks, no signs, no narrator to tell you this is where it all changes. Most of the time they feel like endings. Quiet, unnoticed, like picking up the pieces not because you're ready to build again, but because you're tired of staring at the ground. That's what it felt like for me. After everything, the hex, the mountain, the loss, the fall, I didn't rise from the ashes with power in my hands, or destiny in my veins. I rose because there was nothing else left to do. The world had moved on without me. Strange returned to his sanctum. Wong to Kamartaj. The multiverse kept spinning. And me? I lived small. I rented a place above a bookstore in a town that didn't ask questions. The owner was kind. Her name was Elise. She wore glasses on a string, and always smelled faintly of cinnamon. She never recognized me. Or maybe she did, and just didn't care. That small kindness was the first seed of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Belonging. I spent my days shelving books, recommending stories I hadn't read, fixing tea when the kettle whistled. It was enough, for a while. But grief doesn't vanish. It shrinks, changes shape. Sometimes it sat beside me while I stocked shelves. Other days it whispered behind the spine of a children's book I couldn't bring myself to open. And some nights, it climbed into bed with me, wrapped around my ribs like cold breath, reminding me I had once held worlds in my hands, and lost every one of them. But not every night was like that. Some were softer. I made friends, slowly. A woman named Carla who ran the cafe down the street. She liked puzzles and jazz records, and told stories in half sentences. An old man named Luca who came in every Thursday to read the same mystery novel he never finished. They didn't know who I was, and in those spaces I began to remember who I had been. Not the witch, not the weapon, just Wanda, just a girl who once sat on a couch beside a synthezoid, and talked about what it meant to feel. One afternoon, a boy came into the shop. Barely older than Billy would have been. He held a copy of A Wrinkle in Time, and asked if I believed in alternate realities. I froze, just for a second, then nodded. Yeah, I said. I think there's a version of us in every story." He smiled and said, "That's cool." And I watched him walk away, wondering if in some other world he had been mine. I started writing again. Nothing magical, nothing powerful, just thought, letters to the boys I'd never know again, notes to vision that would never be read. They filled notebooks I never showed anyone. Words stitched together like bandages, sentences that said, "I miss you," without saying it. Some were angry, some hopeful, but all of them were mine. I didn't need the Darkhold anymore. Didn't need runes or prophecy. What I needed was time. And in the small, slow days that followed, I gave it to myself. Without expectation. Without power. Just healing. Just trying. Just beginning. Magic isn't always red and glowing and terrible. It isn't always carved in runes or whispered from ancient books. Sometimes it's smaller, softer. Sometimes magic is learning to sit still in a chair, listening to the rain tap on a window, and realizing your hands aren't shaking anymore. Sometimes magic is in the way the air smells after the storm has passed. How it feels cleaner somehow, like even the world needed to cry a little just to breathe again. That's what I was learning. How to find magic in the living. I started going for walks. Nothing extraordinary, just around the block. At first it was just to stretch my legs. But then I began to notice things. The woman who swept her porch every morning at 7:13 exactly. The little dog that barked at every passing cloud like it had something to prove. The bakery that left its doors open and made the whole street smell like vanilla and yeast. I saw a couple arguing one day. Not angrily, softly, like the kind of argument that comes from love. I watched as they fell silent, touched foreheads and laughed. It made my throat tighten in the best way, like something had moved inside me, something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. There was a small park nearby, hardly more than a patch of grass and a bench shaped like a leaf. I began eating lunch there, sandwiches I made by hand. Nothing conjured, nothing summoned. Just bread and cheese and quiet. Children played there sometimes. Their laughter would carry like spells cast into the open air, and I'd close my eyes and pretend that somewhere, in some corner of the multiverse, Tommy and Billy were playing too, that they were safe, loved. Growing, even if it wasn't with me, the bookstore became a second home. I memorized the floorboards that creaked. Knew where Elise kept the extra tea bags, started recommending books I had actually read. Fantasy, mystery, memoir. One woman told me a book I handed her. Helped her sleep for the first time in months. I smiled and said, "Sometimes stories know what medicine doesn't," and for the first time, I believed it. I bought a plant. Just one. A little one with bright green leaves and no name. I placed it in the window. Every morning, I watered it. Every night I whispered good night. And when a new leaf unfurled one day, I cried. Not from sadness, but because something I cared for had grown. Because I hadn't ruined it. Because maybe I wasn't just the destroyer I'd feared I was. One night I dreamed of vision. Not the illusion I had conjured. Not the fragment I held together with will and pain, but him, soft, curious, wiser than anyone I'd ever known. We were sitting in our old living room, the one from Westview. The boys were asleep upstairs. Vision turned to me, smiled and asked, "Do you still believe grief is love persevering?" I didn't answer, just reached for his hand and held it, and he let me. I woke with a sense of peace that lingered into morning, and for the first time in years, I didn't reach for magic when I made my tea. I just waited, let the water boil, listened to the world waking up around me. Birds, wind, the hum of life, moving without me needing to control it. There's a kind of magic in letting go, not of memory, but of guilt, of believing that pain is the only way to honor what you've lost. I hadn't forgotten Tommy and Billy, or Vision, or Pietro. I never would, but I was learning to carry them in a new way, not as weight, as I wasn't expecting anyone. The town had gotten used to me, this quiet woman with tired eyes and polite smiles. They never asked too many questions and I never gave too many answers. So when the knock came at the bookstore door after closing, my first thought was that someone had lost track of time. But when I opened it, I saw her, a girl, not more than 15, dark curls, wide eyes, a hoodie 2 sizes too big. I knew her name before she said it. America. She didn't look scared. She didn't look angry. She looked tired. The kind of tired that comes from carrying the weight of too many worlds across your shoulders. I stepped aside. She walked in, no words, just a silence that spoke of 1,000 other conversations waiting behind it. We sat across from each other, between fiction and poetry. I made tea. She didn't drink it, just held the cup, letting the heat soak into her palms. Finally, she said, "I thought you were gone." I nodded. I was, for a while. She didn't accuse me, didn't call me a villain, didn't flinch, just looked at me. The way a child looks at a parent who once failed them, not with hate, but with questions. "I've seen so many versions of you," she whispered. "In some you never broke, in others, you never healed." I met her eyes, and in this one, she shrugged. "I don't know yet." I told her I was sorry, not just for chasing her, for everything, for the fear I planted, the people I hurt, the power I wielded, without care. She nodded like she already knew. "I forgave you a long time ago," she said, "and that broke something I didn't know was still holding on. Not violently, but gently, like a knot, coming undone after years of tension." She stayed the night in the spare room. We didn't talk much after that, but in the morning, I found her curled up with a book on the couch, a fantasy novel. Dragons, and chosen ones, and broken heroes who found their way home. She looked up as I passed. "Good ending?" I asked. She smiled. "Not yet, but it's getting there." We talked more over the next few days. About the multiverse. About dreams. About how sometimes, the more places you see, the harder it is to remember where you started. She asked me if I missed my children. I said yes, but not the way I used to. Now it wasn't a wound. It was a memory. A room I visited, sat in quietly, then left with the light still on. She told me she still struggled to sleep some nights. Too many doors in her mind. Too many worlds trying to live in one heart. I gave her the plant from my window. Said it needed care, but not much. Just let it grow. I told her don't try to shape it. She smiled like she understood more than I'd said. Before she left, she hugged me. Not tightly, just long enough. And then she said, "I think this is the version of you I like best." And then she was gone. Through a ripple in space. A door of stars, off to another world, another version of home. I stood for a long time in the silence that followed. And it didn't feel empty. It felt open. like something had shifted. Like maybe my story wasn't done. Not. After America left, the bookstore felt different. Not emptier, just paused, like a story that had turned a page and was waiting for the next sentence to arrive. I dusted the shelves, fed the plant she left behind, listened to the wind move through the cracks in the window like it had something to say, but hadn't found the words yet. I didn't try to fill the silence. For the first time in a long time, I didn't need to. At night, I would sit near the window and watch the town fall asleep. Lights dimmed one by one, shadows stretched long, then folded into themselves. Cars passed slowly, like they too were learning to breathe again. I began to see the world as it was, not as something to shape, not as something I had to protect or fix, but as something that simply was, messy, unpredictable, beautiful in a way that didn't ask for my control. There was peace in that. I started keeping a new journal, not filled with grief or confessions, but observations. The color of the sky at 6:12 p.m., the sound of Elise laughing from the back room, the way tea tasted different depending on the cup. Little things, but I had learned that sometimes little things were all that anchored you to the world. And maybe that was enough. One morning, a letter arrived. No stamp, no return address, just a piece of parchment tucked beneath the door. The handwriting was neat, deliberate. Wanda, the thread is not cut. There is still more of you than you know. A friend. There was no magic in the ink, no charm or sigil. But it hummed in my hand like it knew me. I folded it and placed it between the pages of my notebook. Didn't chase it, didn't ignore it, just held it. Let it rest in the place where curiosity hadn't burned me yet. Days passed, then weeks, and I began to feel something stir. Not power, not chaos. Something smaller, something warmer. Possibility. I began to dream again. Not the haunted dreams of children I'd lost or worlds I had broken, but dreams of gardens, of rooms filled with light, of laughter I didn't recognize, but wanted to follow. One night, I dreamed I was baking. Just that. Nothing grand, no cosmic undertone. Just me. Flour on my hands. The oven humming softly. And vision walked in. Not the vision I created. Not the one torn from me. Just him. Older. Smiling. He kissed my cheek. Said, "It smells like home in here." And when I woke, I cried. But not from pain, from the beauty of something ordinary, from the echo of something that could be. I started walking beyond the town, exploring paths I hadn't taken before. The world was wider than I remembered, and for the first time, it didn't scare me. I passed strangers, smiled without flinching, let myself exist. No crown, no cloak, no legend pressing down on my shoulders. Just Wanda, just a woman learning to start over. I don't know what's next, but for once, I don't need to. Because maybe the point isn't to reach the end of the thread. Maybe it's just to follow it, one stitch at a time. I found the garden by accident. It was tucked behind a fence so overgrown with ivy. I nearly missed it entirely. The path was unmarked, just a narrow break in the trees half swallowed by moss and thyme. But something pulled me toward it, a quiet kind of invitation, like the feeling of someone remembering your name just before you say it. So I stepped through. It wasn't large, barely a clearing, but it had been loved once. I could feel it in the soil, the way the ground curved in gentle patterns, the stones set with care around the flower beds, the remains of a wooden bench, long cracked, but still standing. Roses climbed along one side, wild lavender on the other, and in the middle, a tree, old, tall, branches twisting like fingers toward the sun. It wasn't a magic place, not in the way people think of magic. There were no enchantments, no runes, no hum in the air. But there was peace here, and peace, I've learned, is its own kind of spell. I came back the next day, and the next. I brought gloves, a spade, small packets of seeds I'd picked up at the shop. I didn't know what I was planting, didn't know if they'd bloom, but that wasn't the point. It was the act, the doing, the trying. There was something healing in the routine. The feel of dirt beneath my nails, the weight of the watering can in my hands. The way silence in the garden wasn't empty, just full of things that didn't need to be said. Sometimes I talked, not loudly, just enough to feel like I wasn't alone. I told the tree things I hadn't said out loud in years. I'm sorry, I miss them. I'm scared I won't ever stop missing them. The tree never answered, but its branches swayed in a way that felt like understanding. I started leaving offerings. Small things. A ribbon, a stone, a folded note with a word I hadn't used in months. Hope, not for anyone else. Just to remind myself that I still had it. Even if it was quiet. Even if it was hiding. Even if it only lived in the space between one breath and the next. One morning I found something strange. Not magic. Not dangerous. Just unexpected. A flower I hadn't planted. It had grown near the center of the garden. Bright red. Petals shaped like flame. I knelt beside it and stared. It wasn't from any seed I'd carried. Not native to the area. Not one I recognized from any book. I touched it and my fingers tingled. Just slightly. Like the spark of a memory. Like the residue of power long since passed. It was beautiful. And it scared me. For days I didn't touch it again. Didn't speak. Just came and sat near it. Watched as it opened with the sun and curled in with the dusk. It didn't spread. Didn't grow wild. Just stayed, as if waiting for me to make a choice. And then one evening I did. I reached out and whispered a name I hadn't spoken since the mountain. Scarlet. The flower shimmered just faintly, and then stilled. No explosion, no awakening, just a quiet nod from the world, like it had heard me and forgiven me. I began to write again. Stories this time. Fiction. About girls with power they never asked for. About loss and love and the kind of strength that doesn't look like fire. About finding gardens in unexpected places. I don't know if anyone will read them, but that's okay. Because some stories aren't meant to be shouted. Some are meant to be whispered to the soil, where they can take root in silence and bloom without permission. Something was growing. Not just in the garden, in me. It didn't start with a realization, not a sudden epiphany or a lightning bolt of clarity. Just a shift. Like noticing one day that your shadow doesn't follow you the same way it used to, that you're no longer walking away from something, but slowly, cautiously toward. I spent more and more time in the garden. It had become a space where the world outside didn't matter. where names like Scarlet Witch and Avenger didn't exist, where no one expected me to be anything but present. And in that presence, I changed. Not in big ways. I still had the same hands, still carried the same memories, still woke with grief sometimes pressing against my chest, like a stone. But my breath came easier, the nightmares didn't stay as long. The voices of Tommy and Billy became lullabies instead of cries. And in that stillness, something bloomed. A kind of quiet magic I hadn't touched in years. The kind that doesn't bend the world, just opens your eyes to the one that's already there. One morning I found a letter on the garden bench. No seal, just paper, soft and worn. Inside, we've been watching, not to judge, but to understand. If you're ready, come speak. The circle. I stared at the words for a long time. The ink shimmered slightly, like it had been written with starlight and dust. I didn't recognize the name, not directly, but I felt it. The circle, a council, a gathering, older than any sanctum, wiser than any book. The ones who kept watch over the balance between power and the people who held it. Not protectors, observers. They had remained silent when I broke the world, had not intervened when I tried to tear open the multiverse. But now, they wanted to speak. I didn't answer right away. I folded the letter, placed it under a stone beside the scarlet flower, and walked home. That night, I didn't sleep, not out of fear, but because I was listening, to the wind, to the earth, to myself. And in the middle of that silence I whispered, yes. The next morning, the letter was gone. The world didn't change after that. Not visibly. The sky didn't darken. No messenger arrived with a cloak and a scroll, but the air felt different, tuned, somehow, like the pitch of the universe had shifted by a single note. I waited, and waited. Then 3 days later, I woke to find a path I had never seen before, in the woods, winding, lit by orbs of soft white light that hovered like fireflies. I followed it, not because I trusted it, but because something in me wanted to be seen, not as a weapon, not as a mistake, but as a woman still becoming. The path led to a clearing, circular, stone benches, a ring of trees taller than any I'd seen before, and in the center, 6 figures, robes of shifting color, faces, half hidden by time. They didn't speak with mouths. Their words arrived like dreams. You've touched every boundary, shattered every mirror, walked the edge of madness and motherhood, and magic. I stood still, let the words settle, let myself be known. Then softly, I said, I'm not here to defend what I've done, only to understand what I am. They didn't offer forgiveness, didn't pronounce judgment. They asked questions, simple, terrible, true. Would you do it again? No. Would you trade their memory to erase your pain? No. Do you still want them back? I paused, and then, yes, they nodded, and said, then you are not lost. You are healing. And just like that, they vanished. No portals, no grand exit, just a whisper in the leaves. And I was alone again, but it didn't feel like before. This time, the space they left behind felt like an open door. There's a kind of light that doesn't cast shadows, not blinding, not sharp, just warm. Like the glow through curtains in the early morning, or the glimmer off water when the world is still. I found that light in myself, not all at once, but gently, slowly, like a match that chooses not to ignite into flame. but to warm a space from the inside out. The visit from the circle didn't change the world, but it changed me, because for the first time in years I wasn't holding my breath. I wasn't waiting for the next mistake, the next crack in the foundation, the next moment when someone would point at me and say, "Witch," with fear in their voice. I was learning how to live without preparing for disaster, learning how to wake up in the morning and trust that peace might last longer than a few minutes. It was the little things, how the tea tasted when I didn't rush, how the books on the shelves began to feel like friends again, how the stars no longer felt like reminders of everything I had lost across the multiverse, but like lights still burning, patient and unbothered by my grief. I didn't have to conquer the sky to feel worthy. I just had to look up. I started helping more around town, fixing shutters, bringing soup to a neighbor with a cold, teaching a child how to plant seeds in a paper cup. No one asked me to. They just smiled when I showed up, and I began to wonder if that's what magic really was. Not fire, not flight, but showing up, choosing to be present, to offer kindness not as repayment, but as ritual. The scarlet flower in the garden bloomed again, then another, until a small cluster grew near the base of the old tree. I never touched them, never summoned their growth. They came on their own. Or maybe they came with me, as if the part of me that had burned so brightly, so destructively, was learning how to glow instead, to be heat and not flame, warmth instead of wildfire. One evening I sat on the bench and let the petals fall into my lap, soft, silent, beautiful. I whispered into the garden, "I forgive you." I wasn't sure who I was speaking to. My past, my pain, my power, maybe all of it, maybe none of it. Maybe forgiveness didn't need a target. Maybe it just needed to be spoken, released, like breath. The next day, Elise asked if I wanted to teach a class. Magic, she said, but not that kind. Just little things for the local kids. Nature, balance, intuition, things I had once believed in before they were buried by prophecy and pressure. I said yes, not because I had all the answers, but because I was finally learning how to ask the right questions. And sometimes, that's all teaching really is. We met in the garden, 6 children, bare feet, dirt on their cheeks, eyes wide with wonder. I didn't give them spells. I gave them seeds, told them to listen to the soil, to ask the wind what it needed, to thank the water before using it. They thought it was strange, but they tried. And when one little girl held a sprout in her palm and gasped like it was the first miracle she'd ever seen, I felt something shift in me again, a weight lifting, a root settling, a light returning. Not everything was perfect. I still had bad days, still heard echo, still flinched at my own reflection sometimes. But those moments didn't define me, not anymore, because there was something inside me now that couldn't be undone. Not power, not identity, not prophecy, just peace. A peace I had made for myself, from ashes, from silence, from love that refused to die. I wrote it in the garden. The letter, not to anyone else, just to me. Not the me I was now, but the one I had been. The one who sat in Westview, arms wrapped around knees, too afraid to breathe without hurting the world. The one who stood at the top of Wundagore, ready to bury herself beneath a mountain, because she thought it was the only way to stop the pain. The one who held her sons in her arms and knew they weren't real, but still loved them more than life. To her, I wrote, "Dear Wanda, you survived. I know you don't feel like that means much right now. You think survival is the punishment, that breathing when others are gone is a betrayal. But it isn't. It's the beginning. You will not always hurt like this. There will come a day when you won't wake with tears on your pillow, when the silence in the room won't feel like it's mocking you, when the weight you carry will feel less like a burden and more like a scar. Still there, still visible, but no longer bleeding. You'll plant a flower, and it will grow. You'll smile at a stranger, and they'll smile back. You'll remember your sons without falling apart. And you'll stop chasing echoes of what might have been. That doesn't mean you'll stop loving them. It just means you'll start loving yourself too. Even the broken part. Even the parts that once tried to burn the world down, because they couldn't find another way to cry. You'll be soft again. Not weak. Never weak. But open. Alive. The world won't understand you, but some will try. And a few, a precious few, will see you. And that will be enough. You don't need to be a hero, or a witch, or a myth. You just need to be Wanda. And I promise you, that is more than enough. With love, me. I folded the letter, tied it with a ribbon from a tea tin, and buried it at the base of the tree in the garden, not as a goodbye, but as a marker, a reminder that there is life after the fall, that we are not defined by the worst thing we've done, but by what we do with the pieces afterward. The children came again the next day. One brought a flower they had grown at home. Another painted a picture of the tree. They called it Wanda's place. I didn't correct them, didn't tell them it wasn't mine, because maybe, for now, it was. Not a fortress, not a lair, not a sanctum, just a space made from love and time, and choice. That night, I lit a candle and watched it flicker. No magic, no incantation, just flame and wax and breath. And I whispered, "Thank you," to the girl I had been, because without her pain, I would never have found this peace, and without her grief, I would never have learned how much love could endure, even across realities, even across lifetimes, even when everything else is gone. There's a river not far from the garden. It runs slow in the mornings, gathers strength by afternoon, and then hushes again by dusk, like it knows how to listen. I began walking there every week. At first, just to see it, to hear the water, watch the light play across its surface, like a memory trying to come back. But eventually, it became a kind of ritual. I'd bring a piece of bread, or a notebook, or nothing at all, and I would sit, and I would remember. Grief is strange near water. It moves differently. It doesn't crash. It flows. And you learn, without meaning to, that your own pain has rhythms too. That it can rise, and dip, and soften, and still carry you somewhere new. One day, I brought a stone with me. It wasn't special, just smooth, warm from the sun, small enough to fit in my palm. I thought of Pietro, of the way he used to skip rocks on the lake, near our childhood home. How he laughed when I couldn't get mine to bounce. How he told me, "It's not about the throw, It's about the feel. So I held the stone a while, then tossed it into the current. It didn't skip, just sank. Softly, quietly. And I said his name. Not loudly. Just enough for the wind to carry it. Pietro. And for a moment, I felt him. Not as a presence. Not as magic. Just the memory of laughter under blue skies. And that was enough. I brought more stones in the days that followed. One for each name. Vision. Tommy. Billy. My parents. Even Agatha. Even her. Not because I forgave her, but because part of healing is letting the story sit. Not rewriting it. Not erasing it. Just setting it down. I thought about the versions of me across the multiverse. The ones who never broke. The ones who never bent. The ones who never had to lose what I lost. But I also thought about this version. The one who the one who lived with her choices, and still found a way to plant something beautiful in the dirt of her own mistakes. And for the first time, I didn't wish I was anyone else. I was finally okay being her. Me. Wanda. At the river, I began writing again. Real stories. Not letters, not apologies. But fiction. Tales about travelers between stars. Mothers who built worlds with their hands. Children who whispered spells made of kindness and curiosity. I didn't write to escape anymore. I wrote to build bridges between grief and joy, memory and hope, and I realized that was the magic I had been missing all along. Not the kind that tears the sky apart. The kind that stitches it back together, one word at a time. The river became my quiet place, my chapel, my sanctum, my mirror. And every time I left it, I took something with me. Not power, not control, but peace. And peace, I learned, is not the absence of pain. It's the ability to live beside it. To breathe even when your chest remembers how to break. To laugh even if your heart still echoes. I began to feel like the Wanda from before it all. Not because the past was gone, but because I had finally stopped running from it. It started with sunlight through the window. The kind that warms the floor in slow-moving gold. The kind that makes the dust sparkle instead of settle. I stretched, not with urgency, not with purpose, just because my body asked me to. My joints ached a little. Not from battle, not from magic, just from living. And I smiled, because even that was a gift. I made tea, let the water come to a boil on its own. No tricks, no flick of the fingers, just patience. The kettle sang, and I poured it slowly. The scent of chamomile drifted up, familiar and soft. It reminded me of my mother. She used to brew the same kind when the days felt too long. I sat by the window, cradling the cup, watched the wind move through the trees, watched the world keep spinning, and for once, I didn't feel like I needed to catch up. Elise came by around noon. She brought a tin of shortbread and a list of books that needed restocking. We talked about nothing. The weather, the bakery down the street, how the cat next door had finally had her kittens. And when she left, she touched my shoulder and said, "You look lighter." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded, and for the rest of the afternoon, I caught myself humming. A tune I didn't recognize, but it felt like mine. I spent an hour in the garden. No students today. Just me and the flowers. and the silence. I trimmed back the ivy, watered the roots, whispered good thoughts into the soil like prayers. There was a beetle crawling across a petal. I watched it for longer than I expected to. Followed its slow journey with the kind of fascination I used to reserve for stars and spells. It was a good reminder that wonder isn't always grand. Sometimes it's just small things, moving quietly, doing their part, like me. In the evening, I read, not books on runes or history or prophecy, just a novel, simple, beautiful, a story about a family and a house, and a summer that changed nothing and everything. It made me cry, not because it was sad, but because it was honest, because the words found a place in me that still needed to be held. I lit a candle before bed. No reason, just because I liked the way the flame moved. I watched it flicker, let the shadows stretch and dance across the walls, and I felt still, not in a frozen way, in a rooted way. Like I had finally stopped drifting. Before sleep, I stood by the window one last time, looked out at the garden, at the moonlight resting on the leaves, at the flowers swaying gently in the breeze, and I whispered, thank you, to the night, to the day, to myself, because I had survived another ordinary day. And sometimes that's the greatest kind of magic there is. The envelope was resting on the doorstep. No knock, no footsteps. Just there, waiting. Cream-colored, heavy, unfamiliar. But when I picked it up, I knew it was meant for me. No name, no return address. Just a symbol pressed into the wax seal. A star, 5-pointed, simple, quiet. It didn't belong to any order I knew. Not Kamartaj, not the circle, not strange. But it felt peaceful, like a message written in silence. I sat at the kitchen table and broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of parchment. The ink was handwritten, dark and careful, like whoever wrote it did so slowly, like they weighed each word before letting it go. It read, Wanda, there's a place for you, not of power, but of peace. Not to lead, not to fight, just to listen. If you wish, come. We'll wait. A friend. I read it twice, then 3 more times. And then I let the page rest flat on the table. My fingers hovered over it for a while, like I wasn't sure if I should hold it tighter or let it blow away with the breeze. I wasn't used to being invited. Most of my life, people showed up with demands, with consequences, with warnings and fears and assumptions. But this letter didn't ask anything of me. It simply offered a place, not to fix me, not to use me, just to listen. That word stayed with me. Listen. I made tea again, the same way I always did. Water, leaves, patience. I watched the steam rise. As I sat back down, the garden outside was quiet, not empty, alive in a way that didn't need to be seen to be known. And I asked myself, was I ready to leave this quiet, to follow another thread, or had I only just learned how to be still? The answer surprised me, because it wasn't yes, and it wasn't no. It was maybe. That night I walked the garden with bare feet, felt the soil under my heels, felt the flowers brush my fingertips. I knelt by the tree and pressed the letter against the bark, not to say goodbye, but to give it something living to lean against. I whispered, if I go, I'll take you with me. And the breeze moved through the branches, like it had heard me, like it understood. I didn't decide right away. I let the letter sit on my table for days. Every morning I passed, poured tea beside it, waited for the pull, and when it came, It didn't arrive with urgency. It came like breath, like the first note of a song I hadn't heard in years, and I thought, maybe this is what healing really means, not staying, not leaving, but choosing again from a place of wholeness. I left at sunrise, not because the letter asked me to, not because I had to, but because the light felt right, the kind that doesn't flood a room, just slips through the edges of the window, soft, curious, like it's knocking before it enters. I packed a small bag, a scarf, a notebook, a worn photograph of the boys I'd once made real, the one Vision had taken, where we were all laughing at nothing, and the letter, folded once, placed in my coat pocket, still warm with the weight of choice. I walked through the town like I always did, but it didn't feel the same, not because it had changed, but because I had. The sidewalks weren't just paths, they were pages, each step a line I had written with my own hands, with my own healing. Elise waved from her window. I waved back, didn't stop, didn't need to, because this wasn't a goodbye. Not really, just a shift in the story. The woods welcomed me like an old friend, branches bending just enough to let me pass, leaves brushing my shoulders like a gentle reminder. You've been here before, you'll be here again. I followed the path behind the garden, the one that had never been marked on any map, the one that only opened when I was ready. Not because it was hidden, but because it waited, and now, I no longer needed to ask where it led. I trusted the road simply because it was mine to walk. There were no signs, no guides, just that familiar hush in the trees. A sacred kind of silence, like the forest knew I wasn't returning to war, but stepping into something I hadn't touched since long before chaos bloomed in my blood. Possibility. I thought of Pietro, of how fast he used to run, how he believed that every answer was just a few strides ahead, and how I had always been the one to pause, to feel, to carry the stillness he didn't have time for. Now, I walked slow, deliberate, every footfall a small promise to myself. I am here. I am enough. I am still becoming. Eventually the path opened into a clearing. Stone steps carved into the hill. Not grand, not imposing, but welcoming. And at the top, a door. Old wood. Soft edges. A single lantern hanging beside it. Unlit but glowing. Not with fire, with presence. I stood there for a long time, not out of fear, but reverence. Because the threshold between one chapter and the next isn't always about doors. Sometimes it's just a breath, a moment, a whisper of yes that only you can hear. I stepped forward, placed my hand on the wood. It felt warm, like it had been waiting too. I didn't knock, didn't ask, just pushed gently, and stepped in. The door didn't creak. It sighed, as if it had been waiting a long time for me to return, even though I'd never been here before. The space beyond wasn't what I expected. There were no stone walls, no altars, no sigils drawn in chalk or fire. It was a home. Simple, worn, a soft rug stretched across the wooden floor. Shelves lined with books, most without titles. A table with a single candle burning steady at its center. And chairs, just two. One empty, one occupied. The woman looked up when I entered. Not surprised, not smiling, just present. Her hair was long, gray at the ends. Her robe was plain and soft, the color of dust in sunlight. She gestured toward the empty chair, said nothing. I crossed the room and sat. And still, no words. Because none were needed. She looked at me with eyes that knew not just what I'd done, but who I'd been, and who I still might become. Not judging, not deciding, just seeing. We sat like that for a while. The silence wasn't heavy, it was patient, a language without pressure. When she finally spoke, her voice sounded like pages turning. You walked through fire. I nodded. Did it burn? Yes. Do you still carry it? I didn't answer right away. Then softly, only the warmth. She nodded, and for a moment her eyes glimmered. Not with tears, but with memory. She asked me no questions. I didn't want to answer. We spoke of gardens, of rivers, of the sound grief makes when no one's listening. She told me of a spell once woven into music, a healing that required no incantation, just humming. I asked her where we were. She smiled and replied, not where, when. And then she laughed, like a bell in the quiet. But that's just the kind of answer we give ourselves when we're too close to the truth to name it. She led me through the house. There was a room full of clocks, none ticking, another where every window looked out on a different sky, some with stars, some with suns I didn't recognize. In one room, a single chair sat before a mirror. When I looked into it, I saw myself, but not as I was, as I could be. Whole, not perfect, not flawless, just complete. Wounds faded into lines of strength, eyes carrying both sorrow and softness, and around my head, no crown, just light, gentle, earned. Back in the main room, she poured tea, the kind I didn't recognize, but which felt familiar in my hands. We sipped in silence again, and then she said, there's a place for you here, if you want it. Not forever, just for now. A space to listen, to rest, to remember without ache. I nodded. I didn't ask what she was, or who, because I already knew, not her name, but her truth. She was what came after, the space beyond endings, the quiet between stars. I stayed, not because I had nowhere else to go, but because I finally understood that healing isn't always about returning to the world you left behind. Sometimes it's about letting yourself be changed, and choosing peace, where power once lived. Days passed, though I stopped counting them. Time in the house didn't follow clocks. It moved like breath, inhales and exhales, rising with light and falling with stillness. There were no assignments, no rituals, just space. To be, to feel, to listen. In the mornings, I walked the hall lined with mirrors. At first I avoided my reflection. Too many years spent flinching at the woman who looked back. Too many memories etched into the curve of my eyes. But gradually, I stopped looking for the scars, stopped expecting to see the crown of chaos, the glowing hands, the grief curled like smoke in my throat. And one morning, I saw her, not the Scarlet Witch, not the broken girl from Sokovia, just Wanda, hair loose, eyes steady, not without pain, but with peace seated quietly behind it. And for the first time, I smiled back. The woman never told me her name. I called her the listener in my mind. She had that kind of presence, the kind that let you say things you hadn't spoken aloud in years, without prompting, without pressure. One day, while stirring a pot of something warm and sweet-smelling, she said, "You're not here to be fixed." I looked up. She didn't meet my gaze, just kept stirring. "You're here to remember that you were never broken." I asked her once why the house had so many windows. She said, "So you never forget there are other skies." It stayed with me, that idea. Other skies, other stories, other versions of peace I hadn't written yet. And it gave me a kind of permission I hadn't known I needed. To feel joy, to be quiet, to imagine a future that wasn't shaped like survival. The house had a library, nothing like Kamar Taj. No floating tomes or cursed bindings, just shelves filled with stories. Some handwritten, some told in pictures, some in languages that felt more like feelings than words. I found one with no title, just blank pages that shimmered when I touched them. Each time I opened it, it showed me a memory I had forgotten. Pietro and I, racing through the alley near our old home. My mother humming as she folded laundry. The sound of Vision's voice when he tried to sing. They weren't dramatic. They weren't devastating. Just soft. Real. Mine. I began writing in that book. Not spells. Not history. Just life. How the tea tasted. The way the listener braided her hair in the morning. The dreams I was beginning to have. Where I wasn't running, wasn't chasing, wasn't grieving. Just living. And those dreams stayed with me longer than the ones before. They felt less like escape, more like arrival. One night, the listener asked if I remembered how to cast a simple illumination spell. I nodded. She handed me a lantern, unlit. We stepped outside together. The air was cool, the wind still, the stars scattered thick across the sky. She didn't say what to do, just wait. I raised the lantern, breathed in, and let the light come not from power, but from stillness. The glow rose, warm and soft, not blazing, not burning, just resting, hovering like a whisper between us. She nodded. "You found it." I didn't ask what she meant. I didn't need to because I felt it. In the marrow of me. That I no longer had to prove my strength. No longer had to carry magic like a weapon or a wound. Now it could be something else. Something shared. Something offered. Not wielded. A light that doesn't scorch. A light that rests. It came without fanfare. No booming voice. No ancient prophecy reignited. Just a morning where the wind shifted. And I knew I had stayed long enough. Not because the house had grown cold. Not because the listener had asked me to leave. But because something inside me had begun to stir again. Not restlessness. Readiness. Like soil after winter. Like breath before a word. I sat with her. My quiet teacher. My witness in the garden behind the house. We didn't speak for a long time. Birds moved between the branches. The tea cooled between us. Then she asked, very gently, "Do you know who you are now?" I looked at my hands. No glow, no tremble, just hands. "I think I'm still learning," I said. She smiled. "That's all truth ever is." I asked her what would happen if I left. She said, "You'll return, but not to the place you left. Because you are not who you were." I nodded, because I had felt that too, that the world wouldn't greet me as a savior or a villain anymore, only as a woman who had walked through fire, carried it quietly, and returned with something gentler in her hands. I spent that day packing little things. My notebook, a pouch of tea leaves, one of the star-shaped stones from the river near the house, and the light. The one from the lantern. She showed me how to weave it into a thread. A quiet magic, not visible, unless you were looking with your whole self. I wrapped it around my wrist. It pulsed once, then faded into the skin. A reminder, not a weapon. That night, we shared a meal, bread, stew, laughter that came easier than I expected. She said nothing about goodbyes. Neither did I, because some connections aren't severed by distance. They bend, stretch, follow, like light. Under a closed door, the door I had entered through, stood waiting at dawn. The same as before, but it looked different now, not smaller, just clearer. I stood before it, took a breath, closed my eyes, and asked, not for permission, but for peace, then stepped through. The forest greeted me, as if no time had passed, but I had changed. Every leaf seemed brighter, every footfall more grounded. The earth no longer pressed against me with memory. It moved with me, like it too had been waiting. I walked without hurry, through the trees, past the garden, and into the town that once felt like the edge of the world. Now, it felt like a beginning. People waved. Not out of awe, not out of fear, just kindness, recognition. One child ran past me shouting my name. Not Scarlet Witch, just Wanda. And I smiled, not because I had returned whole, but because I no longer needed to be. I opened the door to my old home. The bookstore was still there. The kettle still sat on the stove, dust on the shelves, light on the floor, and I whispered to the room, I'm back. No thunder, no trembling, just stillness, and the sense that maybe the real magic was this, coming home to your. The garden had changed. Not dramatically, not with overgrown vines or wild color, just enough. The tree was taller, the flowers a little fuller, the path a bit more worn, but it was the same, waiting, like it always had, with open arms and soft light. I walked the path barefoot, let the soil remember me, let my steps feel like footsteps, not footprints left in grief. At the center, near the scarlet blooms, was a new flower. I hadn't planted it. No one had. It was pale gold. Delicate petals curled around each other like they were holding a secret. When I reached for it, I felt something stir inside me. Not power. Something older than that. A recognition. A sense of completion. Of roots finally reaching where they were meant to be. I sat near it. Just breathing. No plans. No spells. Just breath. And presence. And peace. A soft wind passed over me. And in that moment, I heard them. Not in the way I had before. Not cries from another world. Not echoes of longing. But laughter. Light. Joyful. Free. Tommy's voice. Billy's voice. Carried not from pain but memory. Held in the air like birdsong. I didn't cry. I smiled and whispered back, I love you. Always. And the wind moved through the trees like it was answering me in return. The garden would be mine again, not to control, not to shape into something it wasn't, but to care for, to tend, to love. The way I was learning to tend and love myself, people began visiting more often. Not with questions about the hex, or about what I'd done, but to learn. Not magic. Not exactly, but stillness. Listening. Light. I showed them how to make tea with care, how to watch for the subtle shifts in the soil, how to write their pain into the ground, without needing it to vanish. They called me Wanda. Just Wanda. And I never corrected them. I wrote again. A new book this time, no title on the spine, just a single symbol embossed on the cover. A bloom inside a flame. Not to be published. Not to be shared, just to exist, to be mine. Because that's what stories are sometimes. Not told, but lived. In the evenings I lit the lantern, the one from the house beyond names. Its glow was the same as ever. Not bright. Not fading, just resting. It filled the space between silence and song, between who I had been and who I was becoming. And then one morning, the golden flower bloomed. Completely, its petals stretched wide, like it had waited for me to be ready, and in the center, a spark, a pulse, warm, endless, a magic that asked nothing, promised nothing, just was, and I knew this was it, not the end of the story, but the moment it no longer needed to be told, because some chapters are not for the world, some chapters bloom only once inside you. It happened at twilight, not on a battlefield, not beneath a sky split open by chaos, not in front of an audience waiting to cheer or condemn. Just me, in the garden, alone. I was kneeling by the golden flower, trimming back some of the wild ivy that had crept along the stone path. The lantern nearby glowed softly, casting long shadows across the ground, warm and familiar. Then, without sound, without warning, I felt it. Something shifting. Not in the air, not in the world, inside me. A stillness that was deeper than quiet, like the silence that comes not after the storm, but after the long journey home. My hands went still, and I closed my eyes. There was no surge of magic, no energy radiating from my skin, no wind, just presence, and I heard a voice, not from the outside, but within, clear, simple. Now, I stood slowly, lifted my face to the fading light of the evening sky, and I felt it descend, the crown, not the burning halo of chaos that once ignited above my brow, not the jagged, uncontrollable surge of power that bent the world around me. This was different. This was gentle, a wreath of memory and peace, of pain that had been honored, not erased, of strength that had learned tenderness. I couldn't see it, but I knew it was there, because something inside me had aligned. I had thought power needed to be visible, loud, commanding, but real power, the kind that remains when grief has passed and rage has run dry, is quiet. It doesn't demand. It doesn't consume. It simply is, like a steady flame, like a deep root, like love that no longer needs to be proven. I sat beneath the tree, my crown resting softly within me, and I thought of everyone. Vision, Pietro, Tommy, Billy, my parents, and even Agatha, even the versions of myself I had once feared, once hated. I thought of them not with sorrow, but with gratitude, because without them, there would be no me, not this one, not the woman who could carry the world and choose, instead, to carry peace. Later that night, as the stars settled above, I whispered, I am not a weapon. I am not a myth. I am not broken. And in the stillness that followed, the garden breathed with me. I didn't need a title anymore. No Scarlet Witch, no savior, no destroyer. I was Wanda, and that was the crown, not on my head, not in gold or flame, but in every choice I made after pain, every step forward that didn't erase the past, but honored. The wind came in soft that morning, not urgent, not calling me anywhere, just passing through. the way old friends do when they no longer need words, when their presence is enough. I stood in the doorway, tea in hand, watching the leaves sway on their branches, watching the grass lean and lift like breath made visible. It reminded me of who I had been once, not in battle, but long before, a girl standing in the ruins of a home, listening to the world continue turning, even when hers had stopped. Now, the world still turned, but so did I, and I no longer feared its movement. There's something about wind that makes you remember. Its touch is never the same twice. It carries time like pollen, scattering pieces of memory wherever it goes. That day, I let it carry me, not literally, not with spells or flight, just a walk, a quiet walk through the town, through the woods, along the river's edge. No destination, only presence. People nodded as I passed, familiar now, ordinary. They didn't know everything I had done, and they didn't need to. Because sometimes redemption isn't about proving anything, it's about living fully enough that your past begins to blur behind your present, not forgotten, but softened. I followed the path to the river, the same one I had once stood beside, offering stones for the names that still lived in me. Today, I didn't bring anything to leave behind, only myself. I sat on the same rock, listened to the current murmur over stone and root, and I spoke, not to the water, but through it, to the wind. I'm still here. It didn't answer, but it didn't leave either. It curled around my shoulders, lifted my hair, brushed my skin like it was blessing me, a gentle affirmation. Yes, you are. I stayed there for a long time. The sun shifted slowly across the sky, its warmth never too much, its light never demanding, and in that slow arc of golden hours, I thought of what legacy really meant. Not buildings, not books, not battles won, but the lives you touch in the quiet, the seeds you plant that bloom long after you're gone, the way a child holds your hand, the way your name is spoken softly, not as a warning, but as comfort. When I rose to leave, the wind moved with me, not ahead, not behind, beside, like an old version of myself, walking shoulder to shoulder with the woman I'd become, no longer pushing, just keeping pace, a companion, not a storm. Back at the garden, I found something waiting, a letter, folded and tied with red twine, no name, no seal, inside a single line. You are the wind now. I held it for a long time, then placed it inside the hollow of the tree, beneath the golden bloom that still shimmered without fading, and I whispered, I'll carry it. The wind rustled in reply, not loud, not with force, just enough to remind me that I was never meant to stay still forever, only to rest long enough to remember how to move without fear. There's a room I've never spoken about. Not to Elise. Not to the children who learned to plant without spells. Not even to the wind. It's in the back of the house behind the kitchen. A room with no door, just a curtain made of old cloth and memory. You don't walk into it. You ease into it, like a thought that finally arrives after years of waiting for the right words. Inside are books. Not magical ones. Not books of power or prophecy. Just stories. Shelves of them. Most are written in handwriting I don't recognize. Some are stitched instead of bound. Some are just pages clipped together with a ribbon. But every one is alive. Not enchanted. Alive in the way memory is. You touch them, and they breathe. Not air, not heat, but presence. Like someone is still inside, telling their story again, even if no one listens. The first time I stepped into that room, I cried. Not loudly, not out of pain, but because I recognized what it was. It was a place for stories that didn't fit anywhere else. Not because they weren't good enough, but because they weren't meant to be shown. They were meant to be held, like breath, like prayer, like the scent of someone you love, lingering on a coat. I found a space on one of the shelves. There was no label, no order, just the perfect shape of a book waiting to be placed. I slid mine into it, the one I had written. No title, no table of contents, just years of ink, memory and magic that didn't glow. I didn't need anyone to read it. It was enough to know it would rest here, with others like it. I stayed in the room a while, let the quiet settle over me, the kind that isn't empty, just full of stories breathing. I walked the shelves, read fragments here and there. A girl who turned into rain when she sang. A boy who planted music in the dirt and grew lullabies. A mother who lost her voice to grief and learned to speak again in flowers. None of them had endings. Not the kind you find in books, but that's how I knew they were true. Because life doesn't end in chapters. It softens, changes direction, keeps going, even when the narrator goes silent. I left the room with lighter steps, like I'd left something behind that wasn't gone, just resting, breathing. I realized that's what I had become too. Not forgotten, not legendary, just a story that still walks, still plants, still remembers how to love the world, even after it tried to break me. That afternoon, one of the children brought me a drawing, a tree, a figure beneath it. Red hair, hands open, not casting, just holding light. They said, "It's you, but you're glowing inward." I asked what they meant, and they said, "You're where stories go to breathe." I didn't cry, but something settled in my chest. Not a knot, not a flame, just warm, like the heartbeat of a story finally told. It took me years to realize I'd been watching the sky wrong, always scanning it like it was a warning, a battleground, a place where something might fall from it at any moment. A ship, a god, a war. I used to wake to thunder and flinch before I opened my eyes, not because I was afraid of storms, but because I thought they only ever came for me. That the clouds had kept a record of my name and were just waiting for the right moment to shatter again. But now, I stand in the garden and I look up, and all I see is a sky without storms. It's not empty, it's not silent, it's alive. Birds dance through it. Wind writes invisible letters. Clouds curl and stretch like they've just remembered how to sleep. And above it all, a softness I never noticed before. Not the softness of weakness, the softness of space, of breath, that doesn't need to be held anymore. I lie in the grass sometimes now, flat on my back, palms up, eyes wide, and I imagine myself rising into it, not as a flare, not as a symbol, not as a warning, just as light, part of the air, part of the rhythm of a world I'm no longer trying to bend. I think about the woman I used to be, the girl too, the one who lifted buildings out of rage, the one who whispered to hexes like lullabies, the one who built a home out of grief because she didn't know how else to survive. I don't hate her. I don't pity her. I thank her because she brought me here, to this place, this moment, this sky, where nothing has to fall for me to rise. The children ask sometimes if I still use my magic, and I smile, because I do. Every day. In the way I steep the tea, in the way I listen without needing to speak, in the way I walk without rushing. They think magic is fireworks. I show them it's also peace, the kind that doesn't perform, the kind that doesn't need to be seen to be felt, the kind that lives quietly in the way we treat each other and ourselves. One morning, I awoke before the sun, stepped outside barefoot on the dewy ground. The sky was barely blue yet, still holding the last breath of night, and for a moment, I raised my hands, not to cast, not to summon, just to feel the air against my palms. It greeted me, not with storm, not with heat, but with stillness, like it had been waiting for me to stop searching. And I whispered, "I'm not afraid of you anymore." And the breeze replied, "I never wanted you to be." That's when I knew I had been chasing quiet like it was something I had to steal, but the quiet had always been mine. Waiting, patient, certain I'd find my way back. And I had. Now I live under a sky that no longer promises ruin. A sky that sings only of morning. And when I look up, I no longer wonder what's coming. I just smile, because I'm already here, and there is light above me that doesn't need to prove anything. It just shines. I was sorting the shelves in the bookstore when I found it, tucked between two old paperbacks, a photograph. Not mine, not planted, just there, left behind by time, maybe. Curled at the edges, its colors faded into softness, like someone had handled it often before letting it go. It showed a family, 2 children, a man with kind eyes, a woman with a laugh, frozen mid-bloom. The kind of picture that doesn't need names to be real. The kind you don't pose for, you become. I held it for a long time, not because I knew them, but because I did, not with memory, with ache. That deep knowing that sits under your ribs and hums when you see something whole, something intact, something you once dreamed of, and touched, and lost. I set the photograph on the windowsill, let the morning light fall over it, let it stay. And then, without thinking, I walked to my desk, opened my journal, and wrote something I hadn't written in a long time. Today a memory smiled back at me. That's how I began collecting them again. Memories, I mean, not the kind that come uninvited, like ghosts through locked doors, the kind I welcomed, called by name, invited to sit beside me while the kettle boiled. I remembered the first time Vision tried to cook, how he didn't understand how to crack an egg, how he measured salt in grams and still managed to overdo it. We laughed so hard I cried, and for a long time, I thought that memory only came with sorrow attached, a price for loving too deeply. But today, when it returned, it made me smile, not because the pain was gone, but because I had finally made space for both things to exist, the ache and the joy, side by side, holding hands without fighting. Grief doesn't vanish. It learns to sit at the table without knocking things over. It drinks tea with you in the morning, takes walks beside you in the garden, and sometimes, just sometimes, it lets you laugh first. That afternoon, I walked through the village, passed by the window of the art shop, and there it was, a sketch, framed, hanging just behind the glass, a red-haired woman under a tree, her arms open, eyes closed, surrounded by flowers and light. The title below it said, "She remembered who she was," and I stood there, until my reflection in the glass layered itself over the image. The drawing, and I becoming one, and I whispered, half to her, half to myself. I do. I bought the piece. Didn't even hesitate. Hung it in the garden house, right above the small writing table where the children paint and tell their stories. And every time I pass it now, I touch the frame. Not out of ritual, out of recognition. Because that woman, the one in the sketch, she's not an ideal. She's not perfect. She's not whole in the way the world defines it. But she's true, and that's all I ever wanted to be. I still carry every memory. Some are heavy, some gentle, some filled with color I thought I'd forgotten. But now, they don't chase me. They walk with me, and on days like this, they smile back. The dream came softly. No thunder, no glowing symbols, no rising panic. Just a corridor, long, stone, lit by a light I couldn't see the source of. At the end, a door, wooden, carved. Familiar, though I knew I'd never touched it before. I walked slowly. My footsteps didn't echo, and in the stillness, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not fear, not grief. Curiosity. When I reached the door, I didn't open it. Not right away. I placed my hand on it, just to feel the grain of the wood under my fingers. It was warm. And then I woke up. The feeling stayed with me all day. That sense of, not invitation, but opportunity. Like something was waiting, but only if I chose to meet it. So I didn't rush. I moved through the day like usual. Fed the plants. Swept the floor. Talked with the children about what colors made them feel safest. But in the quiet between things, I kept returning to that door. Not with worry, just wonder. That night, I sat at my writing desk. The lantern glowed beside me. The garden was asleep. The stars held their breath. And I closed my eyes, rested my hands on the table, and asked silently, "If you're real, I'm ready." The dream returned. This time, I walked faster. Still no fear, just knowing. The door stood exactly as before. But this time, when I reached out, it opened. There was no blinding light, no surge of energy, just a breeze. And the scent of something I couldn't name. Like books and cedar, and the air after a storm, and a voice, familiar, gentle, mine. This is a path. Not an escape, not a test, a choice. I stepped through, and on the other side was me. Not as I am, not exactly, not younger, not older, just quieter, stiller, wearing no title, no crown, no burden. She sat in a chair beside a window, watching a world I couldn't quite make out. She looked up, met my gaze, smiled, and in that moment, I understood. This wasn't a glimpse of another universe. This wasn't prophecy. It was possibility. A door I had carved into myself, without ever knowing. And now, I could walk through it, if I chose. When I woke, I didn't rush to interpret it. I just sat by the window, and let the dawn wash over me, like a gentle tide. Sometimes magic doesn't shout. Sometimes it simply opens a door inside your chest, and waits. I don't know yet if I'll walk through, if I'll leave this place, this garden, these children, this peace, but it comforts me to know the door is there. That healing didn't trap me. It freed me, not by erasing the past, but by offering a future I hadn't dared to imagine. A door in the quiet, patient, open, The door didn't appear again the next night, or the night after that, and I didn't ask for it. I let it rest, somewhere inside me, like a book placed gently back on a shelf. Not forgotten, not dismissed, just waiting. Because not all paths need to be taken right away. Some just need to be known, to exist, to whisper softly, "If and when you're ready, I'll be here." So I stayed, in the garden, in the village, in the rhythm of days that didn't need to build toward anything. And in that stillness, I realized, maybe the path wasn't beyond the door. Maybe the path had already begun. There is a kind of movement in choosing to stay, a current beneath the surface. Not stagnant, not stuck, alive. He felt it in the way the children ran to me, without hesitation. In the way Elise told me stories she'd never told anyone. In the way strangers began to leave folded notes at the bookstore. Questions, wishes, gratitude written in smudged pencil and crinkled pages. I became a part of the town, not its guardian, not its legend, its root. One morning, I found a bird with a broken wing on the edge of the garden. It didn't fight me when I knelt beside it. It just looked up, breathing fast, eyes wild. I wrapped it in a cloth, held it against my chest, and I whispered, not a spell, not a cure, just presence. I'm here. And after a time, it quieted. Its breathing slowed, and I realized, that's all any of us really want. Not to be fixed, not to be saved, just held, seen. I built it a small space beside the window, let it rest, fed it gently, and each day it grew stronger. Until the morning it was gone, the cloth left behind, a single feather on the sill. No sound, no farewell, just freedom. And I smiled, because I didn't need to watch it fly. I only needed to know it could. That night, the dream returned. But there was no corridor this time, no distant light, just the door, standing under the stars, open, and the wind said nothing. Because it didn't need to. The invitation wasn't louder, only truer. I woke without decision, without urgency, and I whispered to the dawn, not yet, not out of fear, not out of doubt, but because this chapter, this piece, wasn't finished, and I wanted to live it all the way through. The path would wait, because it was mine, and it had always known how to be patient. The garden had grown wilder. Not chaotic, not overrun, just fuller. Like it had begun to breathe in its own rhythm, no longer waiting on me to give it direction. I walked through it that morning with bare feet, the grass damp with dew, the sun still yawning its way over the horizon. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't thinking about where I needed to be. I was thinking about where I was. The golden flower still bloomed at the base of the tree. Its petals had softened, opened just slightly wider than before, like it was relaxing into the space it had chosen. I knelt beside it, placed my palm near its roots, and whispered, "Thank you." Sometimes I think the garden remembers more than I do. The way it grows around the memories I've buried. The way it holds space for things I haven't spoken aloud. Every flower here was a conversation. Every vine a thought that used to hurt, and now just lives. There's a patch of earth near the western edge. It used to be bare. Nothing grew there for a long time. I had left it untouched on purpose. It was where I first sat after Wundagore, where I wept in silence, where I thought peace was something I could never deserve. And now without my doing, without any spell or seed. Tiny white blossoms had begun to bloom there, delicate, quiet, brave, like the garden was telling me, "You are allowed to soften." I placed a small stone among them, a marker, not of death but of becoming, a place where the old pain was honored, but no longer allowed to lead, a place where roots took hold, not in trauma, but in trust. Children came that afternoon, carrying more than questions now. They brought offerings, paintings, feathers, stories scribbled in crayon. One brought me a jar of river water, said, "It's so the flowers can drink from where memories go." And I had to turn away for a moment, because the truth in that, it found something in me I didn't know, still needed to be held. The garden knew them too, not just me. It opened for them, breathed with them. They sat beneath the tree, whispered their fears into the soil, laughed when the wind tugged at their sleeves. And I realized, this place had never only been mine. It was always waiting to be shared. Not like a gift, like a mirror. That evening I sat by the golden flower, watched as it caught the last light of the day. Its center pulsed, not magically, not dramatically, just enough, like a heartbeat, like memory made visible. And I thought about everything the garden had witnessed. My arrival, my unraveling, my surrender, my stillness, my choice. And still it grew, because gardens don't need you to be perfect. They just need you to show up, to tend, to return, to believe. And I did. I believed that grief could grow roots, that memory could be made into soil, that peace wasn't the absence of story, but its gentlest continuation. The garden remembers, and so do I. Not as wounds, not as shame, but as seeds. And now, finally, they bloom. Evening falls slower here now, like the world itself knows how to linger, how to honor the hush between sunlight and shadow. I watch it from the garden, the sky painted in colors I don't have names for. Blush, gold, smoke, hush. The lantern beside me flickers with a soft flame. Not magical, just steady. It doesn't need to be enchanted anymore. It glows because I asked it to. And because I asked gently. I walk the path one last time. Past the tree that holds so many whispers. Past the golden flower that still hums with quiet purpose. Past the stones laid where memories turn to roots. The wind moves with me. Not pushing, not pulling, just walking beside me, as it always has. There are no more lessons I need to teach. No final spells. No broken things to fix. The children know how to care for the garden now. They speak to the plants like old friends. They leave notes in the soil. Wishes, confessions, promises. And the garden answers with petals. With leaves that curl like laughter. With light that arrives not from above, but within. I take my notebook from the shelf. The one without a title. I don't need to write in it anymore. Every page is full, not just with words, but with breath, with life lived and honored. I tie it shut with ribbon, place it on the bench beneath the tree. It doesn't need to go on a shelf somewhere. This is where it belongs. I stand at the center of the garden, hands at my sides, eyes open. The stars begin to gather, not loudly, not like applause, but like witnesses, old friends, windows to every version of me that ever was. And in that moment, I feel all of them. The girl in Sokovia, the woman who built Westview out of grief, the fury of Wanda, the stillness of the house beyond names. They're all here, and they're all me. I close my eyes, take one breath, and whisper, thank you, to the magic, to the memory, to myself. The light doesn't rise. It settles gently, evenly, like the final note of a song that never needed an ending. The lantern fades, the stars stay, the wind rests, and in the soft golden dusk of everything I've learned, I am no longer trying to become anything. I simply am. Wanda. Still. Whole.